What you're about to hear comes directly from verified medical professionals, people who have dedicated their lives to saving others. They agreed to share their stories only on condition of anonymity. These aren't urban legends passed around at parties. These aren't dramatized accounts meant to sell books or TV shows. These are real moments. Moments that made seasoned doctors, nurses, and hospital staff question everything they thought they knew about life, death, and what exists in the space between. We've all heard of haunted houses, graveyards, and abandoned asylums. But what about the very places designed to protect life? Hospitals are places of healing, of birth, of recovery. Yet, they are also places where the end of life comes more often than anywhere else. Every hospital carries with it the echoes of goodbyes, of last breaths, of final heartbeats. And sometimes those echoes linger. Ask anyone who's worked the graveyard shift, the overnight hours when the world outside sleeps and silence blankets the halls. That's when things happen. Strange things. Things that can't be explained by tired eyes or overworked minds. Because when the visitors go home, when the admin offices go dark, when the lights hum and flicker in long, empty corridors, the night belongs to something else entirely. What follows are 7 true accounts. 7 stories from those who've witnessed the unexplainable while working in hospitals across the country. Different people, different places, but a common thread that binds them all. These stories will make you think twice the next time you pass by a hospital after midnight. Story 1, the repeating room. Sarah had worked the night shift in the ICU at Detroit Medical Center for 12 years. She had seen everything, or so she thought. From tragic code blues to miraculous recoveries that defied medical logic, nothing surprised her anymore. But room 314 would change that. The room had been empty for nearly 3 weeks. The last patient to occupy it had died from complications following surgery, a man in his early 60s with no family and few visitors. His passing had been quiet, unremarkable, and the room had since been cleaned and prepped for the next admission. But no one was assigned to it yet. It just sat there, dark and unused at the end of the hall. It was 2:07 a.m. when Sarah first noticed it. During her routine rounds, she glanced down the corridor and saw a soft glow coming from room 314. The call light above the door was on. Frowning, she approached the room, opened the door, and looked inside. Empty. The bed was made, untouched since housekeeping had last prepared it. Puzzled, she reset the call light at the nurse's station and went back to her rounds. 15 minutes later, it happened again. The light blinked steadily, as if a patient inside was pressing the call button for assistance. Once more, Sarah entered the room. It was exactly as she'd left it, pristine, silent, undisturbed. She checked the button on the wall. Maybe a wiring fault, she reasoned, and reset it again. But the pattern continued. Every 10 to 15 minutes, the call light from room 314 would illuminate, calling for help that no one needed. This went on for nearly 2 hours. Sarah called maintenance, thinking it was an electrical issue. The tech arrived, inspected the wiring, the button, and the connections at the nurse's station. Everything checked out. No mechanical faults, no crossed wires. Out of curiosity and a growing sense of unease, Sarah reviewed the security footage from the corridor. The cameras showed exactly what she expected. No one entered or left room 314 the entire night. Just Sarah herself, checking the room over and over again. The next night, it started again. And the night after that, Sarah began to dread passing that room. She felt foolish, but she couldn't shake the sense that something unseen was at work. One night, in a desperate attempt to understand, she stood in the room itself, lights dimmed, and waited. The call light remained off while she was inside. But as soon as she stepped out and walked away, it flicked on behind her. Unable to let it go, Sarah dug into the patient's chart, the man who had died in room 314. As she read through the notes, her breath caught. During his final hours, the man had repeatedly pressed his call button, over and over, every few minutes. His vitals had been deteriorating, and in his confusion or desperation, he had kept signaling for help, right up until the moment he passed away. His last interaction with the living world had been pressing that button. Sarah's blood ran cold as she realized the truth. The call light wasn't malfunctioning. It was repeating a pattern. A patient's final call for help, trapped in time and playing itself out again and again. Word spread quietly among the night staff. No one wanted to be assigned room 314. And when weeks later, a new patient was admitted to the room, the call light never misfired again. The phenomenon stopped as abruptly as it had started, as if whatever presence had been lingering was finally at peace, its final call answered at last. Sarah still works the night shift. She walks the same halls, but even now, years later, she never forgets room 314. And sometimes, when the ICU is quiet and the clock approaches 2 a.m., she glances down that corridor, half expecting to see that soft glow blinking again. Story 2. The Elevator Passenger. David had been working security at Houston Children's Hospital for 8 years. The night shift suited him, quieter halls, less chaos than the daytime, and a chance to help families during their most stressful moments. But no amount of experience could prepare him for what started happening on his rounds one humid summer week. It was close to 11 p.m. on a Tuesday when it first occurred. David was escorting a tired, worried parent down to the parking garage after visiting hours. The hospital's main building was nearly deserted, its once busy corridors now dim and silent except for the occasional beep from machines echoing behind closed doors. They boarded the elevator, and David pressed the button for the ground floor. The car hummed softly as it began its descent. But instead of going straight down, the elevator abruptly stopped on the 4th floor, the pediatric oncology ward. The door slid open with a mechanical sigh, revealing a darkened hallway beyond. At first, David saw nothing. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a small figure standing at the threshold, a child-sized silhouette in a hospital gown. The figure stood perfectly still, head slightly tilted, as if watching them. David blinked, startled. When he turned to look directly, the figure was gone. The hallway was empty, the doors to patient rooms closed, and the nurses' station dark. The parent hadn't noticed anything, too focused on digging keys from a purse. David shook it off, chalking it up to fatigue. But it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Each time was the same. He'd be riding the elevator late at night, and it would stop on the 4th floor without being called. The doors would open, and there would be that small figure, always in the same spot, always still, always vanishing when David tried to focus on it. It didn't matter if he was alone or with someone. The elevator seemed drawn to that floor, as if responding to a call no one had made. Disturbed, David decided to check the security logs and footage. The footage showed the elevator stopping on the 4th floor. The doors opened, but no one was there. No small figure, just empty hallway, empty elevator. Still, he couldn't shake what he'd seen with his own eyes. He spoke with a few longtime staff members, cautiously at first. One nurse's face paled when he described the small silhouette. "That sounds like Joshua," she said quietly. He was 7, loved playing with the elevator buttons. Even when he was too weak to stand, he'd beg us to take him for rides. Passed away about a month ago. Oncology floor. David felt a chill run through him. The small figure. The elevator stopping as if summoned. The silent, watchful presence. It all fit. Determined to break the pattern, David tried something different. The next night, as the elevator slowed at the 4th floor, he stepped forward before the doors fully opened. "If it's you, Joshua," he said softly, "it's okay. You don't need to ride anymore. You can rest now." The doors opened onto the empty hallway. No silhouette, no chill, just the quiet hum of machines in the distance. And for the first time in a week, the elevator continued on its way without interruption. From that night on, the elevator never stopped on the 4th floor again without being called. The phantom rides ended as mysteriously as they began. But David still remembers. Every time he passes that floor on his rounds, he finds himself glancing toward the elevators, half expecting to see a small figure waiting patiently for just one more ride. Story 3. The Whispering Gallery. Dr. Elena Rivera was in her 3rd year of residency at a large teaching hospital in Chicago. Like most residents, she was used to long, grueling shifts, the kind that blurred the line between night and day. The overnight hours, though exhausting, usually brought a strange kind of peace. Fewer patients, fewer families, and a quiet that let her focus. But 1 week during her night shifts would change how she felt about those hours forever. It started on a Wednesday around 1:30 a.m. Elena was alone in a small exam room, stitching up a patient who'd come in with a deep laceration from a fall. The hospital was unusually still that night. No trauma alerts, no codes, just the soft beeping of monitors in the distance. As she concentrated on her work, she became aware of a faint sound, the unmistakable murmur of voices. At first, she dismissed it as background noise. Maybe other staff were nearby, chatting quietly in the hall or at the nurse's station. But as she placed the final suture, she realized the voices were coming from somewhere they shouldn't. The supply closet directly across the room. The whispers were low and rapid, as if 2 or more people were speaking urgently, but she couldn't make out the words. Curious and slightly annoyed, Elena set down her tools, walked over and opened the closet door. Empty, just shelves of gauze, gloves, and medical supplies. No one inside. The voices stopped the instant she opened the door. Puzzled, she closed the closet and returned to her patient, brushing off the incident. Maybe she was just tired. Maybe it was the sound of air through the vents, or a trick of the acoustics. But the next night, it happened again. Same time, same soft, urgent whispers, same closet. This time, she waited, listening carefully before opening the door. The voices continued, overlapping in a strange, rhythmic cadence. When she swung the door open, nothing. The closet was as empty as before. By the third night, she began to feel unsettled. The voices always came when she was alone with the patient, never when others were present, never during the busy daytime hours. The whispers felt closer now, clearer. She could pick out the tone, solemn, deliberate, like a prayer or a ritual. Determined to figure it out, Elena asked the charge nurse about the closet. The older woman's expression darkened. Oh, that closet used to be something else years ago. Before they remodeled, that's where the old morgue used to be, before they moved it down to the new wing 15 years back. Elena felt a chill. She went back to her charts and began researching the history of that area. The hospital records confirmed it. The closet now used for supplies had once been the entrance to the morgue, the place where last rites were often performed for the deceased before being transferred to funeral homes. Suddenly, the whispers made a terrible kind of sense. The cadence matched the rhythm of prayers, the soft murmur of last rites spoken in low voices for the dead. That night, when the whispers began again, Elena didn't approach the closet. She stood quietly, head bowed, and whispered a prayer of her own. The voices faded, replaced by the steady hum of the hospital's machines. In the nights that followed, the whispers came less frequently, as if acknowledging her respect. Eventually, they stopped altogether, but the memory stayed with Elena. Every time she worked that night shift, every time she passed that closet, she felt the weight of those voices. A reminder that the hospital wasn't just a place for the living. It was a place that still held echoes of the dead. Even now, she sometimes wonders what would have happened if she hadn't listened closely, if she hadn't acknowledged the unseen. And she always tells new residents, when you hear something strange in these halls at night, don't be so quick to dismiss it. Some things here predate all of us. Story 4, The Vanishing Patient. Janet had worked as a night supervisor in a large psychiatric hospital on the outskirts of Phoenix for 15 years. She had seen her share of strange behavior, disturbing confessions, and moments that made her question the limits of the human mind. But nothing unnerved her like the nights she was responsible for Mr. Rodriguez. Rodriguez had been admitted after a serious mental health crisis. A middle-aged man with hollow eyes and a soft, polite voice. The staff knew he was high risk. He was placed in a secured wing on constant observation, with bed checks scheduled every 30 minutes. His room was near the nurse's station, so he could be closely monitored. But none of their protocols prepared Janet for what happened during her midnight rounds. It was just after 12 a.m. when Janet reached Mr. Rodriguez's room. The door was slightly ajar, and as she glanced inside, her heart skipped. The bed was empty, the sheets pulled back, no sign of the patient. For a brief moment, panic set in. The wing was locked down at night, doors and windows secured. security cameras covering every exit. There was no way he could have left without triggering an alarm. She radioed security, her voice tight. Code green. Patient missing. Room 208. Lock down and initiate search protocol. Within minutes, staff swept the floor, checked closets, bathrooms, and the secured courtyard. Nothing. Rodriguez had vanished without a trace. Nearly 20 minutes later, Janet returned to his room, heart heavy with dread, and froze. There he was, lying in bed, asleep, the sheets neatly covering him as if he'd never left. Janet stood in the doorway, chilled to the bone. How had he gotten past them all? How had he returned without being seen? She woke him gently. "Mr. Rodriguez, where were you?" He blinked at her, groggy, confused. "What do you mean?" "I've been here. I've been sleeping." Security footage was reviewed over and over. It showed no gaps, no one leaving the room, no one entering, just Mr. Rodriguez in bed, undisturbed. Over the next 2 weeks, it happened again and again. Each time, Janet would check his room and find it empty, bed unslept in, sheets folded back. Each time, a frantic search would follow, and each time he would reappear as if by magic, peacefully asleep. By the third incident, staff began to murmur. Some said Janet was exhausted, imagining things. Others avoided his room on their rounds, unnerved by what was happening. Janet couldn't shake the memory of his intake notes. Before his admission here, Mr. Rodriguez had been treated at another facility. There, he had been found unresponsive in his room after a serious mental health episode. They discovered him lying in bed, in the exact position where Janet kept finding him after these disappearances. It was as if some part of him was replaying that moment. As if his body was there, but his spirit was slipping in and out, caught between despair and survival. One night, Janet decided to test her theory. When she found his bed empty again, she didn't call a code green. Instead, she sat quietly in the corner of the room, waiting. She kept her eyes on the doorway, listening to the soft tick of the wall clock and the distant hum of the hospital's machines. After what felt like an eternity, she saw it. A soft distortion, like heat shimmer in the air. The impression of movement at the edge of her vision. And then, Mr. Rodriguez was there, lying in bed as if he'd always been. Janet never reported that detail. She knew how it would sound, but from that night on, she changed how she handled him. She checked on him gently, respectfully, as if acknowledging that unseen struggle. And the vanishing stopped. Years later, when new supervisors asked her about the most disturbing thing she'd seen, she always hesitated. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because some things she believed were better left as mysteries. Even now, when she walks the hall of that wing at night, she sometimes feels the faintest ripple in the air outside room 208. And she remembers the man who seemed to exist in two places at once. The man whose battles were fought in silence, in the space between life and loss. The Code Blue Echo. Tom had worked as a respiratory therapist for over a decade at a regional hospital in Kansas City. His job often put him on the front lines during the most critical moments, when patients were struggling to breathe, when seconds counted, when Code Blue was called. But nothing unnerved him like what started happening in room 208. It began on a Monday night at exactly 3:17 a.m. The loudspeaker crackled to life, and the dreaded announcement echoed through the quiet corridors. Code Blue. Room 208. Tom, running on instinct, grabbed his bag and sprinted down the hall toward the room. His heart raced, the familiar surge of adrenaline taking over. But when he reached room 208, he skidded to a halt. The room was empty. The bed was neatly made, the monitors unplugged, the equipment silent. There hadn't been a patient assigned to that room in weeks. Confused, Tom contacted the nurse's station. They looked at him blankly. No code had been called. There was nothing logged, no announcement issued, no button pressed. It was as if the alert had come from nowhere. The next night, at precisely 3:17 a.m., it happened again. Same announcement, same empty room, same chilling confusion. The pattern repeated itself night after night. Always at 3:17 a.m. Always room 208. Always nothing there. Tom's colleagues began to take notice. A few joked about it nervously at first. Maybe it was a glitch in the system. Maybe someone was playing a prank. But maintenance found no issues with the paging system. IT checked for hacking or malfunctions. Everything was clean. The hospital's equipment wasn't the source of the alerts. Desperate for answers, Tom started digging. He asked the nurses who had worked the floor longest. That's when an older nurse, Carla, pulled him aside. 208, she said softly. You know what happened there, don't you? Tom shook his head. No. What? 6 months ago, middle of the night, there was a code blue in that room. Young guy, early 40s. Massive heart attack. We tried for 23 minutes to save him. He didn't make it. That room's been empty ever since. Nobody wants to use it. A cold weight settled in Tom's chest. The phantom code blue alerts. They always came 23 minutes before he arrived at the room, just as the failed resuscitation attempt had lasted 23 minutes. It was as if the room, or something tied to it, was replaying that final, frantic attempt to cling to life. One night, determined to face whatever was happening head-on, Tom waited outside room 208 as the clock neared 3:17 a.m. The seconds ticked down, and sure enough, the announcement came, code blue. Room 208. But this time, Tom didn't rush inside. He stood quietly in the hallway, watching, listening. For a few long moments, there was only silence. Then, faintly, he heard it, the soft creak of the bed, the whisper of feet on the floor, the distant beeping of a heart monitor. But when he entered, the room was empty, silent, lifeless as before. Tom began leaving a light on in room 208 during his shifts. He kept a small token, a prayer card, on the bedside table. After that, the phantom code stopped. The alert ceased. It was as if whatever presence had been crying out had been acknowledged, seen, and finally allowed to rest. But Tom never forgot. Every time he passed room 208, especially near 3:17 a.m., he felt that old weight, that sense that something unseen still lingered there, just beneath the surface of the hospital's hum. And when new staff asked about strange things on the night shift, Tom would only say, "If you ever hear a code blue for a room you know is empty, just pause a moment and listen." Story 6, The Calling Voice. Linda had been a night aide at a small community hospital in rural Georgia for 6 years. She liked the quiet of the night shift, the way the world seemed to slow down after midnight. The work was steady, the patients mostly resting, and she found peace in those still hours. But room 112 would shatter that peace and leave her questioning what she believed about life, death, and what lingers between. It started on a Thursday night. The clock had just ticked past 2:45 a.m. when Linda heard it, her name. Soft at first, a woman's voice calling from down the hall, "Linda." She paused, listening. Maybe one of the patients was awake and needed help. The voice came again, clearer this time. "Linda," it was coming from room 112. That room housed Mrs. Williams, an elderly woman who had been unconscious for 3 days following a massive stroke. The doctors said she had no higher brain function left. She wasn't expected to recover. Family had come to say their goodbyes and gone home, waiting for the inevitable call. Linda entered the room, her heart beating faster. To her shock, Mrs. Williams was awake, eyes open, clear and focused. "Linda," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Where's my husband? I need to see him." Linda didn't know how to respond. Mrs. Williams' husband had passed away 5 years earlier. But before she could say anything, the old woman sighed, closed her eyes, and drifted back into unconsciousness, as if the moment had never happened. The next night, at exactly 2:45 a.m., it happened again. The voice calling for Linda, the patient awake and lucid, asking for her husband. And each time, within 5 minutes, Mrs. Williams would fall back into that deep, unresponsive sleep, as if someone had flipped a switch. Linda mentioned it to the nurse on duty, who dismissed it as impossible. "She's in a coma. You're probably just tired, hearing things," the nurse said. But Linda knew what she saw, what she heard. Night after night, the pattern continued. Always 2:45 a.m. Always the same quiet voice calling her name. Always Mrs. Williams waking just long enough to ask for the man she loved and lost. Driven by both fear and compassion, Linda began sitting with her during those moments. She'd hold Mrs. Williams' hand, speak softly, assure her that everything was okay. Sometimes, she'd even tell her that her husband was there in spirit, watching over her. It seemed to comfort the old woman. The tension in her face would ease. The tears would stop, and then she'd slip away again. Linda started to dread that hour of the night. She found herself watching the clock, bracing for the call. And when it came, she'd go to room 112 with a mix of sorrow and duty, knowing she was the only one who could answer it. Then one night, the call came, but this time when Linda entered, Mrs. Williams didn't speak. She just looked at Linda, smiled softly, and squeezed her hand. The monitor showed her heart slowing. Linda stayed by her side, whispering words of comfort as the old woman took her final breath. The time of death? Exactly 2:45 a.m. After that night, room 112 was quiet. The voice never called again, and Linda found herself both relieved and deeply moved. She felt as if somehow Mrs. Williams had been waiting for those moments, those brief connections, to let go in peace. To this day, Linda keeps a small silver locket that belonged to Mrs. Williams, given to her by the family as thanks for her kindness. And when she passes room 112 on the night shift, she sometimes pauses, half expecting to hear that soft voice calling her name once more. Story 7, the final round. Patricia had worked as an oncology nurse at a large hospital in San Diego for over 20 years. She was known for her steady hands, her calm demeanor, and her deep compassion for her patients. The oncology ward was a place of both heartbreak and hope, and Patricia had seen more than her share of both. But nothing prepared her for the quiet visitor who began making rounds during the darkest hours of the night. It started about 6 months after the passing of Dr. Harrison, the ward's beloved oncologist. Dr. Harrison had been a giant of a man, both in stature and spirit. Even after his own cancer diagnosis, he continued to work for as long as his body allowed, checking on patients, offering comfort, and mentoring young doctors. When he died, the entire hospital mourned. Patricia worked her usual night shift the first time it happened. It was 4 a.m., that strange hour when even the hospital seemed to hold its breath. She was finishing paperwork at the nurse's station when she caught a glimpse of movement at the end of the hall. A figure in scrubs, clipboard in hand, moving quietly from room to room. At first, she assumed it was one of the residents, or perhaps a new doctor unfamiliar with the overnight routine. But as she watched, she realized something was off. The figure stopped only at the rooms of patients who had recently passed away. It would pause at each door, as if listening, then scribble something on the clipboard before moving on. Curious and growing uneasy, Patricia got up to approach. But as she drew closer, the figure turned the corner and vanished. She followed, but the hallway was empty. No doors had opened, no elevators had been called. It was as if the figure had simply melted into the air. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same figure, same silent rounds. Always the rooms of the recently departed. Patricia tried to rationalize it, but something in her gut told her this was no living colleague. On the third night, determined to solve the mystery, she waited near one of the rooms, hidden just out of sight. And when the figure appeared, she saw him clearly under the dim lights. The face, the walk, the way he held the clipboard, it was Dr. Harrison. Her breath caught, the kind, weary eyes, the slight stoop of his shoulders. It was him, the doctor who had devoted his life to this place, to these patients. Still making rounds, still checking on those he had cared for in life. Patricia felt no fear, only awe and a deep sadness. She whispered softly, "Dr. Harrison, it's okay. You can rest now. They're at peace, and you can be too." The figure paused as if hearing her, and then slowly faded from sight. After that night, the ghostly round stopped. But Patricia never forgot the sight of him, and neither did the few other staff who admitted in hushed voices that they too had seen the doctor on his final rounds. To this day, when Patricia walks those halls during the quiet hours of the night, she sometimes feels his presence, not as a figure in the shadows, but as a comforting weight in the air. A reminder that some people are so dedicated, so full of care, that even death cannot sever the bond between healer and patient. And sometimes when she's alone in a room where a patient has just passed, she imagines she hears the soft rustle of a clipboard and the gentle voice of a doctor who never truly left his post. As these 7 stories were gathered from hospitals in different states, told by medical professionals who had never met, an unsettling pattern emerged. Every incident took place during what staff quietly called the dead time. Those deep night hours when the world outside is asleep, and within hospital walls, the veil between life and death feels thinnest. Each location held a history of loss. A room where a desperate code blue failed. A hallway where a child took their last breath. A closet that once housed the dead. And every witness? A healthcare worker who had been present for at least one patient's final moments in the weeks leading up to their encounters. What are these echoes we speak of? Are they restless spirits, trapped between worlds? Are they imprints left behind by trauma and love, by fear and hope in equal measure? Or are they reminders that in hospitals, the very places where life begins and ends daily, some connections refuse to be severed, even by death? The staff who shared these stories don't seek explanations anymore. The rational mind wants science, wants proof, wants clean answers. But those who walk hospital halls at 2 a.m. know. Some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries. They've learned to coexist with the unexplainable, to honor it, to move quietly in spaces where the living and the dead seem to share the same air. So the next time you find yourself in a hospital after midnight, whether as patient, visitor, or staff, remember this: you are not alone. The healing never truly stops. The care, the compassion, it lingers. Sometimes, so do the ones who gave it. And sometimes, so do the ones who needed it most.